If you're doing things the same way everyone has been doing it and are satisfied with it, then you're just like every moron out there. This is the 3 reasons why you're still mediocre by Dan Pena. There used to be a saying that religion is the opiate of society. This basically meant that when people struggled and worked their long, laborious jobs, the remedy they would have is to go home and pray. The act of praying and everything else that surrounded being religious would give people a sense of justification that everything is happening for a reason. In other words, it'll give them a reason to accept the hardships they're going through and to make it seem like everything's alright. Dan Pena suggests that we use conventional wisdom the same way some people use religion. The stuff the teachers and your parents teach you are basically tools for us to feel good about ourselves with what we're doing. For example, your uncle who's a mailman says, "You're holding a very good job, paying a decent wage. Why take the risk and try something crazy?" You hate your work, you're exhausted, and have no energy to carry out anything else through the day. Although you're willing and have considered to try on something else that may potentially better your life, someone tells you, "It's okay. You're making $40,000 a year. That's a lot of money already." Conventional wisdom will more often tell you what you cannot do. Just like people told Steve Jobs not to get into the phone business, and just like people told Elon Musk that he shouldn't get into spaceships and get in the business of manufacturing cars. One of the most important things one person has to do to overcome common knowledge is to recreate yourself. There has to be a new set of foundations that will enable one person to succeed. This video will highlight the 3 likeliest causes of why you're mediocre according to Dan Pena. The first idea one has to get around is that we as people are our own greatest limiter. We like putting caps on what we can achieve, dream, and execute. It is really our brain that disables us from achieving our true potential. Thoughts like, "You can't create a business, you didn't learn about that. Don't invest, you don't know anything about it, you can lose a lot of money in it." These are probably the most common ones that we run into. It's important to remember that before anything new was done, no one else has done it. Before the 1968 Olympics, no one has ever broken the 10-second barrier for the 100-meter dash. But an African-American runner named Jim Hines was the first person to do it. He demolished that record and, more importantly, tore down the psychological barrier associated with it. But just think for a second and apply that idea in your mind. What feats seem impossible to you? Maybe no one in your family has ever made $100,000 in a year. Or maybe no one in your house had ever had a net worth of over $1 million. The second component Mr. Pena includes in reinventing yourself is obtaining new habits through new companions. We've heard the saying, "You're the average of your 5 closest friends." This line has been said way too many times. But the truth is, the people you're currently surrounding yourself are most likely not suitable to achieving the bigger goals that you have. Whenever you'd like to talk about an opportunity you're considering, you'd want to discuss it with a person who has valuable input. Ideally, one who's been there before, has gone through the difficulties, and can even give you warnings of things to come. Your high school friend who works at the grocery store will probably have no valuable input into where to put the $10,000 you've saved. Even more, that same friend probably has nothing to add into which community would be ideal to buy a home and even start a family in. Lastly, reinventing yourself requires you to look at how you view risk. Your parents, although they absolutely mean the best for you, will say, "Be careful." But for someone who is striving to lift themselves out of mediocrity, risk is an absolute necessity. It's best to think of risk as not something that you're taking a chance on, but rather giving yourself an opportunity to move forward with. This being said, Dan Pena also made it important to note the difference between a crazy risk and a stupid one. Some of the biggest and best ideas of the century had come from crazy ideas such as, can we invent a machine heavier than humans to fly in the air? Can we build cars that do not need gas? Or, let's create a decentralized currency separate from banks and governments. As someone who wants to strive for something bigger, you need to tackle these risks with confidence, As a true entrepreneur or leader, you must be willing to grow from the mistakes you had and will make. Overall, Dan Pena argues that there's huge complications for aiming at super success, and it takes a lot of effort and guts to move past what's been tested and into the unknown. Ask yourself, what rules and limitations are restricting your potential? Who are the people you're with the most, and have they been helpful or detrimental to your development? And lastly, how do you view risk? Do you prefer the more secure and stable way, or are you comfortable with the uncertainties of specific ventures? But there you go, a couple of pointers from Dan Pena in how to avoid being mediocre. It's found in his book, Your First 100 Million. And thanks for coming by. And if you had learned something new, give me a like or subscribe.